So my name is Lee Nemux, and I am Chief of Staff at CPE, and delighted to introduce this panel of folks. We spent a little bit of time this morning talking about Kentucky's amazing data system. And we are delighted to have Matt Berry here, who is Executive Director of KYSTATS. This is Kentucky's longitudinal data system. We've got our own Chris Ledford here from CPE, who does research and data analysis at the council. And we've got John Gregory, who is Executive Director of Kentucky Adult Education, with us today. So what we want to do is sort of take the conversation from we've got a great data system to what do we do with this great data system? How can we use it at the state level? And how can you use it at the institution level to drive great policy, practice, and programs? So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Chris to talk a little bit about what we're doing at the council.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Lee. As Lee mentioned, we are doing a lot with data at the council around our adult learner population. And some of the things that I'll walk through today I don't think will surprise many folks, but I kind of want to give a picture of what we can do with data and give a picture of the adult learner profile from the state level. And my hope is that, at least with the CPE data, that, I realize that folks are already doing a lot of work around this in your institutions, in your locales, in your areas, but you might not have that kind of holistic view. Maybe, what's happening in the area development district or the region around you, not just at your institution or in your community. So I hope to spark some ideas about what we can do with data, what kind of data we have from a state perspective, and then hopefully foster some relationships and some dialogue around the important work that we're doing. Because if you hear me say anything today, I want you to take away that we have the best longitudinal data system in America in terms of our post-secondary data and our workforce data and all the things that make up the state's longitudinal data system. If we can help you, if we can provide insightful data, we want to do that. Please ask. Okay? So I'm kind of going to walk through and build a profile of the adult learner from a statewide perspective, from a holistic perspective. And again, I'm so glad to hear some of the industry and workforce focus that I've heard throughout the day and that I know Matt's going to be touching on soon, because it really jives with what we see in terms of our enrollment patterns. One thing I'll say before I get started too with these data is that, we have kind of I don't know where this started, but over time we've kind of got this tradition or habit of classifying adult learners by this age bracket and then looking at all enrollment or all outcomes or all workforce outcomes by that bracket. But what I'm kind of trying to do in the work that I'm doing and stuff that we're looking at with KYSTATS or workforce outcomes is really zooming in on re-engaged or re-enrolled adult learners or first-time adult learners. So it's kind of that some college no degree population that you've heard about, or folks that haven't been to college at all. If we just use a catch-all bucket of people 25 and older, we're catching folks who have maybe gone on a traditional path and they just happen to turn 25 while they're in school, which is not who we're really interested in kind of dissecting or talking about or re-engaging, if that makes sense. So first started with a geographic profile. I've kind of broken this down by raw count and then by proportions to show what I think are some interesting patterns. So here we're looking at, and in the next several slides, we're looking at kind of 3 years aggregated adult learner enrollment. So this is that total enrollment bucket by area development district over the past 3 years. And unsurprisingly, you see the Bluegrass ad and the KYSTATS ad, which is the Louisville area, up at the front with the most, the highest volume of adult learners in their district. Same thing with re-enrolling adult learners. So here we're looking at folks during this period who stopped out for a year or more and then came back to higher education as an adult. Again, there's a large amount of students who fit in this bucket across area development districts, but again, unsurprisingly, very pronounced, over almost 3,500 in the Bluegrass region and then almost 3,000 in the Louisville region. Similar pattern with first-time adult learners, good representation across the districts, but again, really pronounced by count, by volume in the Bluegrass region and in the Louisville region. Now, if you flip all these, this is where this kind of gets interesting to me. When you flip this around proportionally and look at the volume of total or the proportion of total undergraduate enrollment by those same area development districts, you see all the rural areas come flying to the front. In the fall 2020, so we're looking at fall 2020, fall 2021, and fall 2022 when we snapshot our official enrollment for the state, nearly 40% of all the undergraduate students who had a home county in the Kentucky River Area Development District, so the area surrounding Perry County and Hazard, were adult learners. 40% of all the undergraduate learners in that district were adults. And then kind of a similar pattern there, neighboring Cumberland Valley, the Pennyrile district over in the west, Lake Cumberland, all these rural districts have very high proportions of adult learners to their total adult enrollment. Similar pattern, and this is kind of where we start hitting at a lot of points that have been covered today. I want to make again the distinction between re-enrolling adult learners. So that's kind of one population where you think about how do we get these folks to a credential? These are your some college, no degree folks. They got some experience, in an associate or certificate program or maybe a bachelor's program, and then they fell out for some years and came back. How can we help these folks finish? And you see here that they're most pronounced again in those rural areas of the state. Again, adult learners here, but we're looking at first-time folks. So these are folks who never enrolled in college prior to one of these three falls in Kentucky. 3% of all students from northern Kentucky, and again, you see kind of the rural areas with the highest proportions of first-time learners. So I think the key takeaway here is that you've got high volumes in some of the urban areas of the state, but most of, 40%, upper 30% in our regions in eastern Kentucky, southeastern Kentucky, their total undergraduate populations are adults, re-enrolling adults, and first-time adults. So when we think about this population of some college, no degree, or first-time adult learners generally, really great opportunity in some of our rural regions of the state. Now, kind of breaking this off and looking at trends across our education sectors. So we're going to look at our four-year public institutions and then our two-year public institutions. Both of these sections kind of follow the same pattern. So I'm looking at total enrollment over time, over a decade or so, and then we'll kind of break down and look at these populations again in terms of that kind of re-enrolled classification. So some college, no degree, returned, and then first-time students. And I think some of the patterns that you'll see across, what these students are doing, where they're enrolling, will resonate with stuff you've heard a lot today, but to me, they also inspire a lot of ideas where we might, create intersections and strategize about how to bring more of these folks into higher education. So kind of some key findings, and then I'll show this to you graphically. But in fall 2013, at our four-year public institutions, adult learners made up almost 20% of the entire undergraduate population. I've kind of got some breakdowns of that. 55.9, almost 60% of all of those students were low income Intersectionality matters, right? Almost half of those students were parenting students. Almost a third were low income and parenting students. Intersectionality matters. If you fast forward to fall 2022, only 14.1% of all undergraduates were adults. And you kind of see how in those specific intersectional buckets where those changes were most dramatic. A 7-point decline in low-income students, a 4-point decline in parenting students, and then almost a 4-point decline at the intersection of those two. I like these charts. I kind of broke some of the stuff out from an interest for a different presentation, but I think one thing that's really helpful about this is to see visually the shift over time. Just don't get lost in the forest for the trees, but what you're looking at here is a breakdown of, on the left, that darker blue is students who are traditional age students. The lighter blue color is students who are non-traditional age students. I'm going to change the slide, and I want you to watch what happens to that whole light blue shaded area. It gets a whole lot smaller over that period of time, right? That's what the shift in the adult learner population has looked like over the decade. And while the work that we're talking about here today matters so much, looking at these people, these learners, and what their areas of study are, they look vastly different than traditional learners. And that's unsurprising here. And I think some of the data that you'll hear from my colleagues will kind of resonate with where adult learners are finding success, what fields they're re-enrolling in or enrolling in the first time, getting a credential, getting to an associate's degree, and then experiencing some socioeconomic mobility. They resonate with what we're seeing in our enrollment data and how those differ from traditional age students. So here among re-enrolling adults, so again, these are kind of the folks in that some college, no degree population, folks who stopped out for at least a year and then came back as an adult in one of those 3 semesters, fall 20, 21, 22. You see a definite skewness among these folks enrolling in healthcare programs and social and human services programs relative to what you see in a few slides among traditional age students, which is much more balanced across kind of our major SIP areas. Here's the big difference to me among patterns in our 4-year students. This big green bucket here is kind of a catch-all of non-degree and other, so it's not a credential-seeking path. So here you're seeing a lot of students first time re-enrolling at 4-year institutions to take some classes, but not be on a degree track, if that makes sense. So these are non-degree students. 57.3% of that enrollment is non-degree seeking students. These are all first-time students, first-time adults during this period. I think there's opportunity here. How do we translate these into credentials? How do we translate these into outcomes beyond just some classes not intended to earn a certificate or an associate degree? And then here's kind of your traditional age first-time student population. So what you see in all of our official reporting, CPE reporting, kind of our benchmark for everything. And you see a very even kind of spread here across fields, across enrollment and degree fields. 24% in STEM, heavy concentration in arts and sciences at 16%, and then you see some of those more technical programs, business and comms, social and human services, so almost inverted to first-time adult students. Just a couple of success metrics, and then we'll switch over to 2-year. You've heard about this a lot today. Adult students come back when they have flexibility, when they're able to balance a schedule and enroll part-time and get things done at a pace that works for them. Unsurprisingly, at our four-year institutions, we see that adult learners are far less likely to enroll full-time compared to their peers. Among all first-time undergraduates, and even all undergraduates, period, the full-time enrollment rate is between 85 and 95% for all of those students at our 4 years. For the first-time or re-engaged adult students, so the success stories in the work that we're talking about, the folks who have come back, about a 40 to 50% enrollment rate full-time. So as many, a majority or more of them are enrolling part-time. And again, this is important to kind of look at it from this direction because these are the quote-unquote success narratives in the work that we're talking about today. These are the folks who re-engaged or who came back as a first-time student. So it's helpful to look at their patterns, what they're enrolling in, and what the success stories are. One area that kind of also highlights all the important stuff that we've heard today is that retention rates among these groups at our 4-year institutions kind of lags the overall retention rate for all undergraduate first-time students. For our parenting, low-income and parenting, and just low-income first-time adult students, and all three of those groups lag the institutional average retention rate by about 10 to 15 percentage points. And then let's switch quickly to 2-year and so same kind of story, but I want to be clear that here we're talking about 60 to 70% over the decade of all of the adult learners in Kentucky are enrolled at 2-year institutions. So keep that in mind as we roll through this. In fall 2013, 2-year undergraduate enrollment was made up 50.3% of adult students. Again, you see kind of in the breakouts of that how much intersectionality matters. And again, think about all the things we've heard today about access to child care, access to public benefits, access to just student basic needs services. 55% of that group, over half of KCTCS students, almost 60% of that group was comprised of low-income students. 45% were parenting, and almost 40% were both. By fall 2022, that enrollment kind of proportion had shrunk to just under 41%. 48, but still you can see how much the intersectionality matters across these groups. Now, here's an interesting kind of decade shift in this population. To the left, in the way that our software generates these graphs, the majority or the highest, the plurality enrollment will always be on the left. So in this case, over the decade, you actually see such a shift that this box moves over to the right side. 50% again to just a little over 40% over the decade. Tremendous decrease in adult enrollment over this period. And again, a stark point about why our work today matters. Among re-enrolling adults at KCTCS, so again, we're looking at that same 3-year falls of those same 3 years. Again, re-enrollers being those who stopped out for at least a year and then came back, so kind of the success narrative in what we're talking about today. Very heavily concentrated in arts and humanities. Again, you see health very prominent there, and trades. Now, when we look at first-time students, you see trades, health, business, and communications are all kind of the high substantive areas there to me, which, without digging into the specific program, specific credential level, just at the most abstract kind of high state level view, that really signals upskilling to me. A skewness toward trades, a skewness toward business and comms, and a skewness towards health. When you look at these among kind of our traditional first, I lost a box. When you look at these kind of compared to all first-time students, you see, again, more of a spread and definitely more of a focus in arts and humanities. 54% of all first-time students are enrolled in kind of a traditional gen ed path in the arts and humanities. Only a little over a third of our first-time adults. So definitely differences in enrollment patterns. Couple more slides and then I'm going to be done. Proportion of two-year public students enrolling full-time. Again, you see that same pattern here at the two-year sector. Of all first-time undergraduates, about a 62% clip of full-time enrollment. Then you look at our breakouts of parenting, re-enrolling adults, and then all first-time adults. You know, we're 20 to 30 percentage points less likely to see full-time enrollments among those buckets of students. One interesting thing here, retention rates among these groups of students are a little bit closer to the sector average. So retention rates among all these adult groups of students, again, parenting, low income, and the intersection of the two, are lower than the sector average over time, but not quite the spread that we saw in some of our other data. All right, so those are kind of the geographic and sector level profiles of our adult learners. I'm going to kick it over to Matt now, who's kind of going to transition this into workforce outcomes. Thank you.
Well, hey, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Matt Berry. I'm the Executive Director at the Kentucky Center for Statistics, or KYSTATS. Sorry I couldn't be here earlier today because with all of this talk about the best data system in the country, I think it would have been more fun for me to hear that over and over again. But thanks for the comments. We appreciate it. You know, we really are fortunate here in Kentucky to have what I consider to be the most robust longitudinal data system in the country. And that's in large part due to the partnerships we have here. And so it's not just the doing of, certainly not me, it happened way before I got there, but the doing of our office either. So what you'll see here, I think, is the result of over a decade of really hard work at partnering together so that we can combine our data in a way that helps inform the work that you all are doing, which is really critically important. I'm going to show you a show-off slide here. Don't worry about reading it. The rest of my slides will not be this cluttered. But this just kind of shows you, just so that you have a sense of the kind of data that we connect within our system, right? So to take a really quick step back, just in case you're not quite as massive a data nerd as the folks up on this stage, longitudinal data system is really our job is to connect data across sectors and look at it over time in a way that helps inform policy practice in the public at large. That's why we exist. So it's not my job to tell you all what policies are working or what programs I think you should be doing. Really what I'm supposed to do is stand up here and talk to you about the outcomes we're seeing in data and to help to be a resource so that you all have information at your disposal that hopefully will help you do the really critically important work that you're doing. A part of why I'm saying that is so you understand who we are, but also so that I can give you a pitch right up front instead of waiting to the end, which is I'm going to show you a lot of the, I think, interesting data related to adult learners that we already have published in our reports at KYSTATS. But that's it's a really important, but it's a sliver of what we do and how we work. A lot of the work that we do is to be in rooms like this and listen to what your needs are and have conversations about how we might be able to help. So I can't promise that we'll always have the data and information that can inform what you all are wondering about, but I can promise that we'll always pick up the phone and have a conversation about how we might be able to help your work move along or understand the impact or opportunities in your work using data. So that's my sales pitch a little bit. So on the last slide, my contact information is there. Everything we do is publicly available, and we have a pretty clear ways to get a hold of us on our website. So please do, if you have questions, take me up on that offer. But that is not the only reason I'm here today, which is to pitch working with us. The other reason is to talk a little bit about some of the reporting that we have at our disposal and some of the data that we're seeing here related to adult student outcomes. So Chris set the stage really well for some of the enrollment patterns. I thought there was some really fascinating and demographic patterns. I thought there's some fascinating stuff in there. What we're able to do, because we can connect data across systems, is we're able to ask questions like, not limited to, but like, what are the employment and wage outcomes for adult students who enroll in post-secondary education in a particular sector, complete a degree or credential, and then move into the workforce in Kentucky. We can kind of look at that kind of thing. Not kind of, we can look at that kind of thing. So that's a little bit about what I'm going to show you today. We have a lot of this, so I'm trying to give you kind of an overview and a high level, some examples of what we see and pulling out some interesting things. So working left to right are just 4 reports that we have that are all currently available on our website. You all can access those right now, not while we're speaking, of course, but later on you could access those. So all of this is already publicly available. We have the Adult Education Feedback Report, which is a report that we produce with and for Dr. Gregory's shop in adult education. I'm just going to show you real quickly a brief piece of that. We have the Post-Secondary Feedback Report, Multi-State Post-Secondary Report, and then our newest kind of emerging piece of work, which is related to a point Chris made that I'll kind of highlight here in a minute, called the Enrollment to Outcomes Multi-State Report. So we're better at making these reports than naming them, so don't let that throw you off the scent. This is actually pretty good, interesting stuff, okay? So the data within them are pretty good. So let me quickly talk about the Adult Education Feedback Report. I'm not going to talk a ton about this because we actually have the guy in charge of this right next to me, and he's going to come up and speak to you all a little bit. But I wanted to give you a sense for some of the information that we have here. Within that report, I'm just going to show you one example of something that I find to be a little bit interesting here. But you can see the type of information we have around adult education within the state of Kentucky. I should mention, and you'll see kind of where we're headed with this, but most of our data, excuse me, as you probably guessed, given our name, are focused on Kentucky. We do have the ability now to look across state borders, so I'll talk a little bit more about that. In this case, it's all looking at Kentucky. Now, Dr. Gregory, I have been in the room with him, I don't know, 200 or 300 times. And so I'm guessing he's going to come up here and say something to you about adult education is more than GED. He's going to say it in a really great way, and you're going to be entertained by it, so I'm not trying to steal his thunder. However, I do want to mention that because I'm going to show you an example of what we know about our GED completers, and I just want to acknowledge that that's not all adult education is. He's going to talk to you more about that, I'm quite sure of it. But I wanted to show a couple of, in our most recent, this is looking at the 2019 to 2021 cohorts of adult education learners here in the state. You can see, if you were able to dig in, and let me just quickly too say, all of our reports, we try to include as much data and information in our reports as we can to empower you all to use it, right? So all of these are interactive reports. You could filter all of these by in a lot of different ways. I'm trying to pull out some examples, so this is not exhaustive. These are just examples. But what you can see here, in terms of post-secondary enrollment and median credit hours attempted, those are really the two kind of post-secondary focused outcomes we have in this report. The state total for post-secondary enrollment was about 1,500 folks, and that's about 46 per adult ed provider. And then you can see that those folks attempted an average of 12 credit hours in that first first term of post-secondary enrollment. If we had time, we could kind of go through each of these providers, and again, you can filter in lots of different ways, but I did just want to mention we have the ability to have insight into folks who are completing the GED and moving into, and I think that 46 per provider is actually a really interesting data point for us to note there. So that's the quickest one. Some of these others I don't want to, mostly because Dr. Gregory will talk to you about what's going on in adult education, but I did want to kind of dig in a little bit more on some of these other reports. So the Post-Secondary Feedback Report is kind of our big first and seminal, really focused on post-secondary outcomes. So we do have enrollment and demographic data in this report, but I wanted to focus because I knew Chris was going to do a good job of setting up kind of the landscape of adult learners in terms of enrollment and those patterns. I wanted to take a look at our demographic and employment outcomes. So what we're able to do is we're able to look at 3, 5, and 10-year employment outcomes in the state. So just allow me just a quick sort of data nerd moment to tell you kind of what we mean by that. So when we're talking about employment outcomes, we're talking about in the state of Kentucky, and we're talking about unemployment insurance covered employers, right? So just to acknowledge right up front, there are some gaps there. So if you're, an independent, if you're employed in your own business, as one example, if you are employed by an institution who files their taxes in another state, If you're a contractor, as an example, you might not be captured in that, but we do have the vast majority of firms within the state and employed persons within the state. So it's good data. I just want to acknowledge right up front, it's not that we have every human being in the state of Kentucky that's employed, right? So just to acknowledge that. But we can look at these outcomes in a whole bunch of different ways. I'll look at a few. So we can look at credential type, where the student is coming from, whether they're an in-state or out-of-state student, institution type, major group, and then employment classification. So let me kind of jump into some of the patterns that I think we're seeing here. So one of the things I wanted to look at was, and let me just say too, Chris mentioned something really important, which is the way that we are looking at these things. And I know probably the way that you all are thinking about these it has evolved, right? So Chris mentioned we're not going to do the thing where we look at adult learners versus traditional learners versus all. It looks like I'm fully contradicting you right now, Chris, because that's exactly what we're doing in this report. But if you all just give me 5 minutes when we get to the other reports, you're going to see that we are moving beyond that. So it's a point well taken, and we're working with Chris and our friends at CPE to have a better understanding. But for these purposes, I think it is important for us to look at outcomes for adult learners as compared to traditional age students, right? So what you're looking at, 3 sections, right? 3, 5, and 10-year employment outcomes. And within each one of these sections, we're looking at all students, we're looking at adult learners, and traditional learners. The orange circle are the percent of post-secondary completers within that time frame who are employed within the state. The wages, the median wage you can see, are for all of those employed here on the right. So one thing that I wanted to point out, and you can see that I put little arrows, one to make it easier for you all, but also two to remind myself what I wanted to say. So we have kind of 3 spots here that jump out to me as I'm looking at this that I think are interesting in a conversation about adult learners and their employment outcomes. One is the median wage, particularly at the 3-year out mark. So you can see that 3-year mark, the median wages are quite a bit higher, particularly when you just look at adult learners but compared to traditional students, right? So 53,000 to 40,000. Now there's probably a lot going on there that you all are well acquainted with and are working on, and you might look at that and say, well, yeah, of course, right? Or you might not, but I do think that that's an interesting sort of difference there. Similarly, I think it's, 5 years out, you can see that the difference between the employment rates for adult learners and traditional students grows slightly, and then stays about the same at the 10-year rate, but in each case, or the 10-year mark, but in each case, the traditional or the adult learners are employed at a higher rate within the state. And also in each case, the median wage is higher for our adult learners. So I think some interesting things there, just in terms of the employment and wage outcomes. We also have the ability to look. Remember, I said we connect data across sectors and also over time. So this is looking at adult learners, both there, and this is by credential type. So we can look at, again, the percentages there are their employment rates, and you can see their median wages as well. And as you might expect, the median wages go up along the credential continuum. Highest when we're looking at doctoral students. Or doctoral earners, Interestingly, at least to me, the employment rates of associate earners there for adult learners are higher in general as compared to their cohorts in other credential types. So quickly, we can do the same for traditional students. Again, you're kind of seeing some similar patterns there. I think the diploma credential level there is a little bit higher in terms of the employment rate. But you can also, I wanted to just do a quick comparison here. So if you break these are the same charts, if you break them apart and you look at traditional students and adult learners, what you're seeing here is for credential, diploma, and associate, in each case, the employment rates are a little bit higher for traditional students. When you look at bachelor, master, doctoral, it's a little mixed, right? So bachelor, master, a little higher employment rates for adult learners as compared to traditional students. So there are some differences not only within those groups and across credential types, but between adult learners and traditional age students as well. And I think the same isn't, not totally, but the same I think can be said a little bit with wages as well. So Looking again at employment wages across time, now that we're looking at major groups. So I just wanted to pull out a couple of examples. Like I said, we can do a lot more than this. Looking at our major groups are arts and humanities, business, education, health, social sciences, STEM, and trades. So this, again, looking at adult learners, you can see higher wages in general in STEM, higher employment rates in education, and then some, obviously some other information there. These are for adult learners. For traditional, those two things are somewhat the same, although you can see now health has a higher employment rate within the state. So again, we have that ability to kind of pull out those patterns. Now, one thing that I mentioned right up front was it was looking sort of like I was contradicting what Chris was saying in terms of looking at it that way. But this next report, this multi-state post-secondary report, is an example of how we're trying to move beyond kind of the ways that we have traditionally understood adult learners and all learners, really candidly. The multi-state report gives us the ability to look beyond the borders of Kentucky. Now, again, we can't look at every state because these are partnerships and data sharing agreements that we have to build state by state. So right now we have the ability to look at Ohio, Indiana, and Tennessee primarily when you're looking at our multi-state report. But it's a lot of the same information. It's just, if you are, I'm sure we might have someone here from Northern Kentucky University or that area. I lived for a time in Cincinnati, and I know that is so close, that region is so close. Often folks who live there will say they live in Cincinnati, right? So that really matters when you're asking questions like, what are the workforce outcomes for our graduates? If you're not able to have any insight into folks going into Ohio, that can be really problematic, or at the very least, it really limits the impact that you can have with these data, right? So the multi-state report is one way that we're trying to have a better understanding of that. You can see a lot of the data types that we have in the other reports are here. It's just that we can look across states. So what we're doing here is a similar look to what we did in the post-secondary feedback report. But now we have insight into Indiana, Tennessee, Ohio. So when we say, is someone employed, now it's still the same unemployment insurance caveat, right? So I still don't have insight into some of those other types of jobs, but now we're able to see if folks go into Ohio and are earning, or have earned a degree and go into Ohio, what are their wages, what are their employment rates? So one thing I said there is going to be a really important note, because I want to talk a little bit about in our last report that I'm going to show you, I want to talk about kind of some of the things that we're trying to do to have a better understanding when I said when people complete a degree or credential. So these are focused on post-secondary completers, which is a really important group, but we'll talk more about who that leaves out and how we're trying to understand that. So here what we're looking at are credential types, again, looking at traditional and non-traditional students. And we're looking at the completer count. This is obviously over several years. I think it's 07 to 21 is what we're looking at here. I could be wrong on that. Excuse me if I am. But in-state median wage and out-of-state median wage. So if you were to look at this all category here at the very top where I have the first arrow, you can see that non-traditional students or adult learners in our case that we're talking about earn a much higher out-of-state wage, median wage than the traditional, so about $42,000 as compared to $29,000. So that's, again, it's not really necessarily my role to comment on why that's happening or what to do about that, but I do think that's something that jumps out. There is also a gap in terms of in-state median wage, so $39,000 as compared to $24,000. If you look at employment location, out-of-state employment, as compared to in-state employment, you can see the out-of-state is the little gray bar, right? So when you look at that across all degree types, a higher percentage of traditional age students are finding employment out of state as opposed to adult learners and adult degree completers. And then as another example, just to pull out something that kind of jumped out to me while we were preparing this, look down at the bachelor's degree level, and what you can see is, again, probably the highest mobility, not by a lot, but the highest percentage, I guess, of completers who find employment out of state. So this is now looking at 3 years out. And again, this is the same look, so I won't go through exactly what we're looking at, but just a note, what I think you can see, some of the things you can see are the in-state and out-of-state wage differences. Kind of the gap is closing a little bit 3 years out. If you look at the traditional age students who go out of state now within 3 years, that's also a little bit higher, and same at the bachelor degree. So the out of state percentage of employed folks goes up a little bit over time. The wage gap kind of closes a little bit. And then even if you look at, the bachelor degree, it's still highest, but it has jumped up a little bit. So what we can also do is compare or look at, I guess, next to each other, out-of-state employment and in-state employment across major groups, major areas. And you can look at the wages as well. So in this, you're looking at in-state and out-of-state employment, median wages, and traditional and non-traditional students. You can see health for non-traditional students has the highest median wage, and STEM has the highest percentage of employment for non-traditional students. That's 1 year out. When we look at 3 years out, you can see business actually is highest for non-traditional, and then you can look at STEM for non-traditional, which has the highest level of in-state employment and out-of-state employment, as a matter of fact. So STEM is really pulling a large share both in and out-of-state in terms of employment and wages. So I told you that we really focused on completers for both of those reports, and this is the last one that I want to show you, and it's just got a couple of slides because this is really a new and emerging thing for us. So this is called the Enrollment to Outcomes Multi-State Report. Again, we are not paid to name these things. We're not great at that, but the report itself really actually is looking. It takes that question of what are our outcomes for those who complete a post-secondary degree. And it actually looks more fully at all enrollees and what their outcomes are. So it allows for non-completion and re-enrollment. And I think Chris was actually mentioning a little bit of that. This started off called the non-completers dashboard. We didn't like that for lots of reasons. I don't think that's a great name for it, but there's more to it than that. So let me just show you. I'm showing you this one because I think it's really important to acknowledge that, particularly within the adult learner space, but I think in all cases that this is a really important way to look at outcomes, to see what kind of patterns there are in terms of enrollment over time and wage outcomes and employment outcomes. So basically, there's a lot to this, I know, but really what we're looking at in the middle and at the bottom are non-traditional age and traditional age students. We're looking at those who re-enrolled. This is within 6 years of their initial enrollment, by the way. So who re-enrolled, who found out-of-state employment and in-state employment, and who was neither enrolled or employed. So this is really emerging. I think we've got a lot of refinement to do on this, but I still think it's really interesting. And you can see where I think there are some data of note. You can look at when you're looking at non-traditional against traditional, the above associate, you can see the in-state employment for non-traditional is higher, and then when you look at not re-enrolled or enrolled, the above associate is a little bit lower, higher for non-traditional age students. So there's some differences there based on traditional or non-traditional. This is a similar look 3 years out, but now we're just looking at those who found out-of-state and in-state employment and their wages, median wages again. So this is 3 years out, again looking at the same Indiana, Ohio, and Tennessee, and Kentucky. Above associate, out-of-state employment, about $45,000 median wages compared to applied associate at about $41,000. That's for non-traditional or adult learners. And those are both a little bit higher than for our traditional age population. Again, looking 3 years out, you can see kind of some similar patterns and similar differences. Whereas the non-traditional students have a little bit higher in-state employment rate. In fact, at this one, 9 points higher. And that holds against most degree levels. And then finally, this is the last one I'll show you, but multi-state outcomes for 3 years out. The bachelors are higher. You can see about $40,000 as compared to traditional age, which is about $38,000. So I think that there are lots of patterns which I think emerge here if you're looking across our reports. The one thing I want to again reiterate is that this is the understanding of adult learners and the adult population from the post-secondary perspective and from the perspective I think Dr. Gregory is going to share with you is really critical for us. We're still trying to understand the best way to figure out what the outcomes are for these learners. And so again, please do reach out to us with questions or with opportunities to partner so that we can more fully provide you all the information for the great work that you're doing. So thank you all for having me, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Gregory.
All right. So good afternoon. My name is J.C. Gregory. I'm the Executive Director for the Office of Adult Education. So we just have had the opportunity to take a look at things from a quantitative perspective. So I'm going to make an attempt to bring a qualitative component to this process as we talk about adult education. And it may surprise some of you, but the way that I would like to shape this is the highway for college-ready adult learners. Now, that may shock some of you when we speak in terms of adult education, and Dr. Berry was right. From a comprehensive standpoint, from a macro level standpoint, from a totality of all of the circumstances, Kentucky adult education is not a GED program. It is a workforce development program that has a secondary diploma completion / GED component, but it is a workforce development program, and a big piece of that is the transition to post-secondary education, transition to a college campus in the multitude of different forms and formats that suits the scholar, the learner. So that's what we're talking about. So I just want to try to shape that before we even get started. So from a statutory standpoint, so this has little to nothing to do what I say, but this is what the law says. The federal law says, from an authority standpoint, that a adult education means instruction below the post-secondary level that does a multitude of things. And for the purposes of this context, the most significant one of those is the transition to post-secondary education and training. So let me break this down. So let's slow up just a little bit. So, across the Commonwealth of Kentucky, there are approximately 298,000 fine citizens that have not completed the high school process for whatever reason. So that is a primary population that we deal with. But as you see with the attainment of a secondary school diploma, and the most significant pathway for these learners in Kentucky right now is the GED. But there is a conjunctive there, and transition to post-secondary education. That is not an add-on, that is not a nice to have, that is a statutory mandate. We have to do that. This is not a new thing. This law was passed in 2014. It is now 2024, transitioning into 2025. So this is not new. So this is a mandate. And also, we are charged with the link and the relationship to colleges. Because think of it like this. This is a subpopulation that can solve some of the problems that exist on college campuses all across the Commonwealth. And we certainly want to take that opportunity to be problem solvers. Now, from a graphic standpoint, I wanted to try to bring this to life just a little bit. So when we talk about the actual purpose of an adult education, the purpose is employment and so economic self-sufficiency. And also, it's a little known term called family literacy. And that is packed with a multitude of different things, and one of which is the advancement in the employment, as well as the synchronization between a parent or a family member and the child. So, as the parent learns, and then the parent is better able to set the conditions for success for their child. Then we get back to the transition to post-secondary and the college. And we also are in the business of instructing language learners. Now that is another subpopulation that is key and that is significant when we speak in terms and when we look through the lens of transitioning onto a college campus in whatever shape, form, or fashion. So again, we serve as, and I would like to call it a super highway for those individuals that want to go to university and take that path down that street, for those individuals that want to be employed or gain better employment, we can take them to Main Street, and from a family literacy standpoint, we can take you right home to Maple Street. And we can do all of those things that are statutorily mandated, and they are baked into the cake already. So again, this is not a new concept. This is the actual purpose. This is the actual purpose. And if we look at this from a backwards planning standpoint, and let me just say this and be very intentional, so as I choose my words advisedly, completion of the GED is a magnificent goal. And we absolutely want to celebrate, we want to recognize, we want to bring out all of the bells and whistles. However, if you think about this as far as climbing a mountain, that is not the apex of the mountain. That is not the top of the mountaintop. That is on the way up. But we want people to be college ready, because as you saw from the data, the more you learn, the more knowledge, the more that you can earn, and the better that you are able to apply that knowledge to be able to do different things, to be able to reinvent yourself. So we are talking about, and I'll just be simple, we're talking about grown folks, people that based on the circumstances of life have to reinvent themselves. For example, I have reinvented myself 4 times in the last 5 years. In 2019, I was Colonel Gregory, still serving in the U.S. Army. I retired, and then I went to Kentucky State. I went to KSU, and I was an administrator and a faculty member at that fine school. Stayed there for approximately 2 years, and then I transitioned to this position now. So that's 3 times for me in less than 5 years. And I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. So when I figure it out, then I'll let you know. But this is a graphic as to what we actually do. Now, when we speak in terms of partnerships, so let me make this statement. I am just a representative, so I don't do any of the heavy lifting. The heavy lifting is done from the individuals out serving the 120 counties, and many of them are seated here today. They do all of the work. They do all of the instruction and all of the things necessary to set the conditions for these fine scholars to be able to transition onto a college campus in whatever form best suits them for that season of their life. But we have a natural thing going on from a relationship standpoint with the college campuses. Of the 26 local providers that we have, 15 of them are located on college campuses. So that is significant, number one, from a proximity standpoint, and two, that is a natural bridge for them to be able to transition into a different season of their life. And let me just say this, specifically speaking about the GED. And let me perhaps bust some myths here. The GED, the test itself, is not easy. The GED was modified in 2014. It is a normed-based test, which means that the questions are developed by the questions that seniors in high school pass. So 60% of the graduating seniors in high school pass the questions that compose the GED test. So it is a norm-based test that has 4 components, and it is not easy. And when you overlay that with life, with being a parent, with working, and the totality of all of the circumstances, it is a tall task. But the fine folks out across the 120 counties that serve these individuals do a wonderful job in getting them across the finish line. What we want to do from a maturation standpoint is to be able to continue that success process. So once they walk across one stage, we want to build a bridge for them to set the conditions to walk across another stage on a college campus. So that is exactly what we're trying to do. Now, to do that, we do a lot of things, but just like was stated from a statutory standpoint, we provide instruction below the post-secondary level. So in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, the experts and the SMEs are the people that are sponsoring this event. That's CPE. So we have taken the opportunity to partner with CPE to be able to increase that transition. Because if you look at the data, I looked at a report, I think it's the most current, that of the individuals that we served, and I think from a data match standpoint, out of the 9,000 plus, so 721 actually transitioned into the post-secondary space. We can do better. We can do better, and we will do better. So there is an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to excel, to be able to make things happen. Thus is the reason that we have partnered with CPE. And this partnership, not but to the exclusion of the cognitive piece and the instructional piece, but we're talking about basic needs. Because we can go on extemporaneously and talk about all of the challenges and the barriers and things of that nature, and I don't need to list those or name those. But we are making an attempt to focus on those because the most significant and important thing and the value of going to college is completion. It's completion. When you can complete, then you can continue to make some vertical advancement depending upon the season of your life. So that is a very significant partnership that we currently have with CPE that is just getting off of the ground. And in addition, what we're trying to do to facilitate that process internally is we have some very smart folks, one of which is standing up right there, so Dr. David Potter, and his brainchild is a program that he has named Graduating to Greatness, which is that transition onto the college space. So we are doing any and all things required and necessary to be able to be more successful as far as the transition into college. Now, the big question is the why. So when we look at this from the lens of Socrates, that Socratic question of why, that probe, that examination, that trying to explore. So why is this necessary? Number one, because there is enough need to go around. The learners, the center of gravity, what do they need? They need to complete and get a credential, whether that is a certification and an associate's, bachelor's, master's, doctorate, whatever that is. That is the need, because that leads to employment, better employment, and that leads to money. So let's just break it down this way. Even Scripture says, money buys all things. Now, context purposes, the world is not made up of all things. But if you want something and need something, then you need resources and funds. So there is a need. The colleges, we just heard this morning, and we have seen with some of the data, based on the current trends, there are some opportunities to grow as far as enrollment based on birth rates and a multitude of other things and factors that go into that formula. So there is an additional need. The great folks at CPE have this mantra, 60 by 30. So 60% of the fine folks that reside in the Commonwealth of Kentucky will have some form of something from a college campus by 2030. And last but not least, family, so literacy and legacy. We're talking about parents, we're talking about children, we're talking about grandchildren. Personal story. I have a little bit of age on me, but I know I don't look it, so thank you. My wife and I, we have raised 9 kids over the last 3 decades. And we raised our 4 oldest grandkids, the youngest of which I just kicked out of the house to the University of Kentucky a few months ago. So he's the last one, and he's not welcome back. So this is a legacy thing. These are parents, these are children, and these are grandchildren and beyond. And this is about self-sufficiency, self-sufficiency. So that is a business that we're in, and I think this is my last slide. So what is the goal, particularly in this context? It is moving into the post-secondary space, climbing that mountain, going up that hill. So what do? We provide the individual who is college ready as they drive up that superhighway onto a college campus, whether that's in person, that's in a virtual space, or that's a combination thereof. So this, I think, is a representation of that transitional process and where we want to take the individuals that we serve. We want to lead them to a college campus in whatever shape and form that looks like for them specifically as an individual. And that's all I have. So hopefully, so I was able to paint a picture from a qualitative standpoint and perhaps to change your mind and just to acknowledge that the GED is very significant in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, but it is not the only thing the Office of Adult Education, and more specifically, the providers do out across the 120 counties. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you both so much for doing this. All the great data and the great work going on around the state. It's so amazing to hear it all kind of summarized all in one place. I want to add one thing to all of this that I meant to hit earlier, but I thought I would save it. A lot of folks involved in this work in this room. I know certainly a lot of post-secondary folks because I recognize you. Sometimes I think we look at these trends over time, the decreasing adult enrollment. It's happening around the country. It's happening in Kentucky. For the first time in over a decade, Kentucky's adult enrollment, as we measured with our preliminary enrollment files, went up this year. We had skidded from around 45,000 in fall 2013 down to 28,000 last year, and then for the first time in that entire period, adult enrollment across all of our public institutions went up. I'm really excited to be able to look at our final enrollment when we collect that from the institutions over the next month or so to kind of break that down by those first time, by those re-enrolled learner groups, to see kind of how those breakouts look, even the intersections with demographic groups and low-income students. But that just really is such an awesome thing to see as a data person, to then be able to turn around and tell you that the work that you're doing, that we're doing together, that collaborations like this matter. I don't know yet, again, because other folks are doing their final enrollment, so I don't know, how we compare. But every state that we compare ourselves to, they're facing the same challenges and their enrollments are going down. But for the first time, in 15 years, our adult enrollment has gone up, again, about 2,000 students from last year. I had some questions. I'm just going to throw one out because I want to give folks out there a chance to ask some questions. So if I could just ask of you guys, my colleagues on the stage, of all the things that you've heard today or even just in the presentations that we've done together, what do you see as the key themes running throughout and maybe the most important steps ahead to keep that progress going? Anybody who wants to go first?
The most significant thing from my foxhole and my perspective is the application of the data. Because knowledge is not power, the application of knowledge is power. So having the opportunity to use from a partnership standpoint, most specifically these two very smart men here, and to be able to take that data and to be able to use it, and to be able to use it in real time. Because when we think in terms of student basic needs, so when we talk about needs, we're talking real time, not next week, not next month. When these students have needs, they have needs right now. And we want to be able to use the knowledge and more specifically the data to be able to help them in real time. So that's probably the most significant thing that I'll take away.
Okay. Yeah, I think what I would say is hopefully one of the things that came across there is something that I think Dr. Gregory was at least hinting towards, or not, if not just saying, is that when adult learners get into post-secondary education, and particularly when they complete, the outcomes are really good. That's pretty simple, I know, but if you look, I think, across all the slides that I presented, and I think a lot of what Chris was showing you too, it is a really positive outcome. So what I hope that means for you all is something similar to what I think the message about enrollment is, which is that it's really this push and the work that you all are doing is really incredibly critical to a group of people in our Commonwealth that I think will really benefit from what it is you're doing. So I think the numbers are there to justify and to back up what you all are doing and its importance and the impact that it has. And I think that's really valuable to see those numbers. Now, from the real data part, let me just very quickly, I think that we're heading in the right direction, but we have still a lot more to do in terms of more nuanced understanding of who is receiving the benefit of these outcomes and to what degree. So that's why we're starting to look at folks who don't complete and don't re-enroll or those kind of things. So we're pushing forward on that. And I guess what I would recommend is you all keep pushing us so that remains important to us so that we can empower you with that information.
I have to answer the same question, I guess, since I'm up here. I think, to me, the most impactful thing that I've heard, and I'm glad you came in, Lily, because I'm stealing it from you. Lily and her work and kind of what she's doing through the Student Success Collaborative has challenged me as a data person who's looking at all these things and providing information back out to stakeholders, to our post-secondary partners, is to not be so rigid with the definitions that we're looking at, the groups that we're looking at, which is kind of the point that I hit a few times earlier. One thing that really stood out to me was, what about traditional age students? We always use that age bucket, but that non-traditional or that traditional age student group that has non-traditional circumstances. Things that would include folks with children, folks who have become emancipated and live on their own for any number of reasons, folks who are married at a young age and don't live at home anymore. All of those folks fit a non-traditional student profile, but sometimes we kind of miss the mark on those with our definitions. And then the other thing that, we kind of linked across presentations, I think, we're rightly so, we're focused on the enrollment trend over time, which I don't know if we've talked yet, but for the first time in 15 years, adult learner enrollment is up in the public sector. But look at what has been successful. Some of the things that I was hitting on earlier, the first time, those re-enrolling students, and I'll even now throw that kind of traditional student with non-traditional circumstances group in there. What can we infer about what's working there, and then use that to drive communications, to drive targeted efforts in different geographies where we're working. All right, I would like some questions from you all. I will bring a mic around.
I'm just curious, is this Anya? Curious to get your thoughts. It used to be, and I was just kind of thinking back 10 years, where anytime adult serving or community college enrollment went up, people used to point out that it was sort of counter-cyclical with the economy, meaning that unemployment had also gone up. And it seems like we don't talk about that anymore, and it's just maybe not a factor. I think maybe there's a lot of jobs, they're not all great jobs, but a lot more work to be done, a lot of people aging out of the workforce. And also we're talking about, when we say adult learners, sometimes working learners, right? So I'm just curious your thoughts on that. I'm from out of state, so I don't know what unemployment is in Kentucky right now, but are the two totally disconnected these days? And I know it may not be your space, so just do your best on that one.
From a research perspective, I was kind of looking at some stuff around this the other day. The whole kind of explosion of focus on student basic needs, on basic needs support, kind of came out of the idea of the question that you just asked, because over time that trend was true. When economic circumstances were bad, adults come back to college. And the inverse is true, but over the past 20 years, that trend hasn't carried out, and it doesn't work that way anymore. So, okay, why, when these circumstances are met, when the economy's bad, when unemployment is high, why are adults not returning? Enter access to child care issues, sort of this kind of narrative around the increasingly out of touch nature of post-secondary education, or the ballooning costs All of those things kind of went into this explosion of student basic needs work because the way we were thinking about this didn't make any sense anymore. Adult students no longer fit that kind of pattern in the 21st century. Any thoughts?
I think this died, but I'll just try to do it. So the other part of KYSTATS shop that I didn't mention is that we actually have the labor market information office for the state. So I can tell you that our unemployment rate for the state has been comparatively low over the last couple of years. It obviously fluctuates, but it's in the low 4%. I don't know the degree to which enrollment continues to be countercyclical to employment, but I can tell you that rate has remained relatively consistent in the recent months and years. And then from what we're hearing from our colleagues, it seems that enrollment is now on the uptick. So I don't know. What I will say though is I think that's a really important question, and I think it's definitely worth exploring.
I think we can do maybe one or two more.
Yeah, I had a question. So I noticed, and I love this about your presentation, Chris, that you were looking at persistence, okay, of our adult learners. And in our conversations at the NKU table back here, it occurred to me that when we think about retention, we're looking at first-time, full-time, bachelor degree-seeking students, and how do they do over time, and then what are the graduation rates? If we were to focus on that, we would totally miss the adult population in terms of looking at their persistence, from year to year, and then to their graduation rate, because most of them are part-time.
Sure.
So I feel like if we really want to start tracking that population and paying attention to it, that as a state, and even as a country, because we're talking about iPads reporting a lot of times, CPE tries to follow iPads, we have to change the way in which we think about persistence and graduation rates in order to catch that trend, start trending that population. And we should be trending this internally. We should be inside of our universities. We should be doing this.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, in terms of what I was kind of focusing on with these data, I wanted to do something that kind of was an apples to apples comparison, but you're exactly right. If we want to focus more on success outcomes and describe them accurately, we kind of have to blow this out to include, like the iPad, the comment was that the iPad standard definition focuses on first-time, full-time, and we know that most adult students do not enroll full-time, so we're missing a lot of the population that we're trying to describe, which is exactly right. One thing I think, the persistence metric is more applicable here, and again, I think for our purposes, blowing that out to full-time and part-time is applicable here. Great point. Thank you. All right, I think we're out of time. I'm getting the hand signals. Thank you all so much